Hello guys, this is your friend Dark Fox 3.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto was saved by a goddess and built a ultimate harem born of passion and pain. Naruto X Saizune Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Tsunade-sama, I want to see Gato pay for the pain and suffering he has caused the people of Wave, but sending the 3 highest ranking shinobi here in a genin to storm a compound housing what's likely hundreds of bandits and several missing nin seems like a poor allocation of resources, Kurenai said. Kakashi is right, we need to prepare ourselves for Zabuza's return as well as the reinforcements he is bound to have. Zabuza won't be a problem, Tsunade replied. Why not? Kakashi asked. Because Gato plans to double-cross him if he somehow survives his fight with us. Naruto and I have a shadow clone searching the forest now looking for Zabuza so we can strike a deal with him first. If we can convince of Gato's treachery, then the battle on the bridge will be nothing more than an intense sparring match. Furthermore, as Naruto pointed out to me, our mission doesn't specifically say, bodyguard, on it. It merely says to protect the bridge builder until the bridge is completed, and while it is true that Naruto's judicious use of Shadow Clone has greatly sped up that process, the fact remains that as long as Gato remains in power over this country, he will continue to be a threat to Tazuna, sabotage the bridge before it's ever completely finished, and scare away the workers. Therefore, the most efficient path to completing this mission is to remove the threat completely. That's all well and good, but Gato has an army, Kakashi pointed out, and while I doubt there are too many high-level missing nin, there are bound to be a few. Kakashi's right, even if we flip Zabuza and aren't exhausted from a fight with him and his compatriots, we won't know who we're up against until the moment they arrive. There's no way to prepare. Kurenai added. That's where I come in, Naruto signed. Tsunade translated for him and the other 2 jonin couldn't help but be skeptical. While I admit you are far better than anyone thought, Naruto-kun, what can you do that 2 jonin and a sanin can't? Kurenai asked. Tsunade laughed and ruffled Naruto's hair as he quickly signed something. He said he doesn't know what you're talking about and that if I wanted to I could take on Gato's army myself and still win. I appreciate the vote of confidence, Naru-kun, but you know that we made a deal. I'm only your support unless we're against A rank or higher enemies. Even Kakashi's eye widened upon hearing that. Is she trying to get him killed? Kurenai thought to herself. Anyways, Tsunade continued, he may not be at your levels yet, but Naru-kun does something that will be of great help. They looked at Naruto, who closed his eyes for a moment before opening them, prompting Kurenai to nearly shout in surprise. Instead of his normal sky blue eyes, Naruto's eyes had darkened to a deep royal blue that mixed with a glowing, golden orange as the 2 colors swirled into his pupil. Naruto, she whispered in shock, your eyes. I've never seen a dojutsu like this before, Kakashi muttered. This is the Kunshugen, Tsunade explained. Naruto awoke it during our fight with Ryosuke. In terms of sheer tactical advantage, I'm fairly certain with proper training it could be unparalleled. What does it do? Kurenai asked. She couldn't look away from his eyes as they stared at each other. Something about them resonated with a hidden power. His eyes still held their familiar tenderness, but this new transformation made it clear that there was fire and steel waiting in those depths. We're still learning all of its abilities, but for the moment, it allows Naruto to freeze time so long as he remains still. Our first large-scale field test will be when Gato pulls his double cross. Naruto will have clones in a perimeter around the bridge. When Gato's forces arrive, the clones will activate their Kunshugen and analyze all they can about the enemy from every angle. Naruto has also memorized every entry in the bingo book, so he'll be able to relay information on us about any shinobi Gato has in his contingency. If this works, we'll be using that strategy once more when we storm the hideout. Naruto smiled as the two Jonin went over his plan. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of small pieces of paper, each with a small but intricate-looking seal on them. What are those, Naruto-kun? Kurenai asked. None of us brought radios, Tsunade explained, and due to Naruto's disability it would be hard to hear him over them anyway. Instead he asked me to help him design this seal. Naruto handed the seals out before turning around and pointing to the back of his neck, indicating where he wanted them to put it on. Kakashi and Kurenai exchanged a look before shrugging and slapping them on their necks. They were surprised when Naruto opened his mouth and it was almost like his raspy voice was whispering directly in their ears. Suna-sensei helped with the anatomy parts, he explained. There's a command seal on my throat that reads the vibrations when I talk. It then sends a signal to the ones on your necks, which use tiny pulses of your chakra to send the same vibrations to your ears so you can hear me. Naruto, this is ingenious, Kakashi remarked, turning to Tsunade. Are you sure it's wise to be teaching him such complicated fuinjutsu, Tsunade-sama? Tsunade frowned. I didn't teach him anything except the proper anatomy of the ears. Naruto's skill in fuinjutsu is completely self-taught. Naruto shrugged sheepishly as the other two Jonin looked at him disbelievingly. People kept throwing out perfectly good books on it for no reason. It's not really that hard. Kurenai couldn't help but laugh and shake her head. They spent the rest of the night finalizing their plans before going off to bed. The next day passed with little fanfare. The members of Teams 7 and 8 continued training themselves into the ground while Naruto taught Kurenai more signs. Nothing particularly noteworthy happened until dinner when, after the other genin stumbled and exhausted, Inari burst to his feet and started shouting. Why are you doing this? It doesn't matter how strong you get, you'll never beat Gato. You all sit around enjoying yourselves like you're on some sort of field trip. What do any of you know of suffering? Tsunade couldn't help but frown sadly at the hopeless tone in the boy's voice before a deep, feral growling filled her ears as Naruto stood angrily and glared at Inari. She noticed Kurenai and Kakashi both shivered slightly as Naruto's inadvertent activation of the seal on his neck made it sound like there was a wild animal growling right next to them. He stormed past Inari and slammed the door on his way out while Inari merely broke down in tears and ran up to his room. What's his problem? Kanagi asked. Not in the mood to hear the boy she considered a son be made fun of again, Tsunade followed him out the door. It didn't take her long to track him down. She found him sparring against several clones with his sword while others sat in a circle around them watching. All of them had their Kunshugen activated, and she had a feeling many of the ones sitting were practicing their abilities to freeze time as the original viciously cut his way through a never-ending group of opponents. She could feel his chakra surging powerfully as he jumped back. He swung his sword in an attempt to replicate the attack Ryosuke used, but instead of the wave of destructive energy they had seen before, the moment his blade made contact with the lead clones, it and several of the ones behind were dispersed in a gust of wind. Naruto, Tsunade called, bringing the sparring session to an end. What the hell was that? Not sure. Naruto croaked as he slid his sword back through his belt and started dispersing his clones. After receiving the various memories of his clones, some of which had been able to stop time as he attacked, he deactivated his Kunshugen and started signing. Near as I can tell, the second I swung my sword, it shot out some chakra and performed some sort of wind jutsu. The weird thing is, that the wind moved in the exact way I had planned on moving. What do you mean by that? It was almost like the jutsu knew every move I planned on doing and did them all for me at the same time. So the sword uses your chakra to execute multiple maneuvers at once, Tsunade surmised. Naruto shook his head. Not quite. My clones saw that it did take some of my chakra, but then that weird chakra storage seal activated, letting out chakra that was different from mine and mixing them together. Also, there aren't any elemental seals on it anywhere, so for some reason my chakra turned into wind chakra as it was pulled out. Tsunade hummed as she thought about what the implications of Naruto's chakra changing on its own. Reaching into her pocket, she unsealed a sheet of paper and handed it to him. I hadn't planned on teaching this yet, but I think it's about time we find out about your chakra nature. This will help with determining what jutsu will be easier or harder for you to use, as well as for when you want to start making your own. Channel a little bit of chakra into that paper and it will tell you which nature is easiest for you to use. Naruto nodded and did as told. He channeled as little chakra as he could into the paper between his fingers and watched, amazed, as the paper was suddenly cut into 4 equal segments. One segment ignited, leaving nothing but ash on the forest floor, another crumpled into a tiny ball, the corner of another started to become brittle and crumbled off a little as it drifted to the ground, and the corner he was holding became ever so slightly damp in his hand. He looked up at Tsunade, who was once again astounded by what she saw. I don't believe it, but Naruto, it seems you have an affinity for all 5 natures of chakra. She examined the pieces closely, though it seems you have a more of a natural aptitude for wind, fire, and lightning. So you think that's why my sword did what it did? Naruto asked, catching on. Possibly. We know it works with wind chakra, but try molding your chakra like you would for a fire jutsu and swinging your sword. Naruto did as told and went through the hand seals for a small fireball before swinging his sword. They were both astounded as the sword reacted and erupted in flames before shooting them forward in a wave. We'll of course have to up your training until you can learn how to do the different nature transformations with as few hand seals as possible, Tsunade concluded, but I think we just found your trump card. That reminds me, Naruto whispered. Watch this. He closed his eyes and concentrated on his chakra. Tsunade could see him sweating from the exertion, but kept quiet as she didn't want to distract him. After a couple minutes Naruto gave a grunt, and with a poof of smoke, a shadow clone appeared standing next to him. He gave the clone a high five before it dispelled itself. Not bad, Naru-kun, she observed, downplaying how impressive that Naruto had not only managed to use a jutsu without seals, but a high-level one like the shadow clone. She had learned early on that Naruto had a preternatural ability to accomplish feats that others thought to be impossible, and made a point of convincing him that what would normally take a high-level shinobi months to understand or pull off was in fact, quite easy to pull off. She wanted to see how far he could push himself if he didn't have too many limits set on his abilities. It also helped that her skills and knowledge made most things seem easy, further pushing him to work harder while she watched to make sure he didn't hurt himself. But you're gonna be in trouble if you have stop in the middle of a battle and take a couple minutes just to make one clone. It might be smarter to stick with your old way of doing it for now. I know, Naruto replied. But if the Tem unlocks his Sharingan, I don't want him stealing my jutsu without my permission, so I watched my chakra as I made a bunch of clones and then tried making it so it looked and felt the same without the seals. Tsunade smiled at his line of thought and slipped into her fighting stance. They sparred for the next several hours before settling down to sleep under the stars once more. The shadow clones they had searching for Zabuza dispelled, and early the next morning Tsunade informed Kakashi, Kurenai, and Tazuna of what he had said. Naruto sent a clone with extra chakra to protect Tazuna and help with the bridge, and they spent the rest of the morning training, Sasuke and Kiba having finally managed to complete the tree climbing exercise. Deciding to give their students a break, the members of Teams 7 and 8 ventured further into the forest to where Tsunade and Naruto were training. The other genin watched in amazement and jealousy as Naruto and his clones assaulted Tsunade. He hadn't managed to hit her yet, but he was no longer being hurled through any more trees as he used his clones as springboards to quickly change his momentum or substitute out of danger. He even occasionally caused his sensei to lose track of him, making her land a blow on a clone that would suddenly dispel and give him the smallest of openings. Sasuke could feel his blood pressure rising as Naruto flashed through several hand seals, unleashing a burst of gale force wind to intercept the tree trunk Tsunade had casually lobbed at him. He flashed through more seals as the wind tore the tree to shreds, and suddenly the bits of wood started withering slightly as the water was extracted into a sphere in front of him. More seals and the wind carrying the pieces of wood increased before igniting, creating a truly massive fireball that hurled towards Tsunade while flaming debris rained down on her. The water floating above him fell back on the fire as it died down, creating a smokescreen. Tsunade jumped out of the smoke, unharmed, and grabbed the legs of the two clones flying at her from either side in an ambush. She spun in the air and hurled them toward the ground at supersonic speeds. The clones dispelled upon impact, and Tsunade landed with a smirk, shifting her head as another Naruto dove passed her shoulder. She smiled as his right fist crashed into the ground, creating a decent-sized crater. "Congrats, you managed to graze my ear with that last one there." Naruto shifted to his knees and scratched the back of his head, foxy grin in place. His grin turned to a frown though, as Sasuke stormed up to him. "Fight me." Naruto closed his eyes in contemplation, a look at least two of the kunoichi present found adorable, before shaking his head with a grin. He did a quick hand spring to his feet and signed something to Tsunade. She nodded and he walked off to find a quiet place to practice his Kunshugen. He smiled at Kurenai and Hinata as he walked past and took off deeper into the forest. He paused after several minutes and took a seat at the base of a large tree. Closing his eyes, he focused on the feeling of his chakra and worked to mold it properly. Several puffs told him he was successful and he smiled as he got to work. Naruto didn't come back until later that evening, and once again he and Tsunade spent the night under the stars while Kurenai and Kakashi informed their teams of what was going to happen the next day. "Ooh." Gato smirked as the mist cleared and the battered and bloody forms of the various shinobi as well as the bridge workers Zabuza had killed were strewn across the bridge. "It really is unfortunate that you find yourself in such a sorry state, Zabuza," he said, faux concern lacing his voice. "You see, when I had told these fellows here that they were going to be fighting you, I do believe they were hoping for at least a slight challenge before splitting that little bitch of yours between themselves." The various bandits and mercenaries behind him chuckled as Zabuza weakly raised his head. "You bastard," he muttered. Gato smirked. Now, there's no need to be rude." He turned and started walking back through his small army of cell swords. "It's just business, after all." The bandits started to approach the prone forms of the bridge's defenders when they were stopped dead as a loud whooshing sound coming from the nearby trees steadily got louder. Before any of them could move, a giant cleaver burst from the leaves, decapitating several of the bandits in one fell swoop. Chaos erupted as Zabuza, His partner, the shinobi from the leaf, and all the dead bridge workers began disappearing in puffs of smoke. Out of the trees came the various shinobi, all in perfect physical condition. The fight that then broke up was a slaughter. Zabuza and Haku worked together flawlessly. Anybody who managed to stay out of the reach of Zabuza's massive blade was either immediately exterminated with an ice senbon to the neck or found themselves tripping on a thin sheet of ice that hadn't been there moments before, making them easy targets. Sasuke smirked as he shoved a kunai into the throat of yet another bandit. The members of his team were spread out, each fighting their own group of bandits. While the bandits weren't a threat individually, he had at first had some trouble dealing with their greater numbers. He punched, kicked, jumped, rolled, and stabbed with practiced ease, transposing the face of his brother on each of his victims when a bandit managed to slip through his guard. He watched as the man's knife drove towards his chest, before noticing how it seemed to be slowing down. Moving out of the way, he dispatched the thug with ease and took note of how everything seemed to have developed a slight red tinge to it. He chanced a quick look towards one of the other shinobi and watched with glee as Kurenai flipped through several hand seals. He could see the way she molded her chakra and immediately memorized the different hand seals used in the genjutsu. He smiled with sadistic glee and started fighting with renewed vigor. His newly awakened Sharingan glowed, casting fear into the hearts of his enemies as he considered how much closer he was to achieving his ambition. Meanwhile, Sakura and Hanagi were not faring quite as well as their teammate. They were both littered with small scrapes and bruises because the bandits they knocked down just kept getting back up. Eventually, they both managed to kill one of them, but needed Kakashi and Naruto to drag them out of the fighting as they froze up. Once they had both snapped out of it, Kakashi ordered them to return to Tazuna's house and stand guard there. They both nodded, secretly thankful to leave the fight. They were both met by a shadow clone of Tsunade at the house. She healed them and talked them through processing and accepting what they had done while the original stood in the outskirts of the battle, catching any bandits that had managed to get away from the fight. Kakashi was holding back for the most part. There was no need to unveil his Sharingan on such low-level opponents, and he decided that the combat experience would be more of a benefit to the younger shinobi than just watching him cut through the enemy forces. Kurenai seemed to have the same idea, as she mostly kept to playing a support role as she used her genjutsu to provide openings for her students. The remaining members of Team 8 worked like a well-oiled machine. They stuck together and made use of each other's different sensory abilities to cover any blind spots. They all managed to kill several bandits, each freezing for only a moment before continuing to fight, the situation not allowing them the time to process what just happened. Unfortunately, a moment can make all the difference in a battle, as Hinata now found herself staring down the blade of a wicked-looking dagger as it stabbed a path straight for her jugular. She closed her eyes, preparing for her last act of disappointment upon her clan when a loud clang forced her to open her eyes. Standing in front of her glaring at the now disarmed bandit was Naruto. Her eyes widened as he spoke in a low, almost rumbling growl. "Don't you lay a finger on Harem." Tsunade felt the unbelievable pressure that Naruto was exerting and rushed in to grab Kakashi by the shoulder. "Don't." "But Tsunade-sama, that pressure," Kakashi argued. "We need to get him under control and check to make sure the seal is not damaged." "Let this play out," Tsunade ordered. "If I think things are getting out of hand, I'll step in." Naruto growled once more, his Kunshugan glowing brightly as he faced the remaining enemies. He could feel an enormous energy flowing through him, fueling him with more power than he knew what to do with. "No," he thought, "I know exactly what I have to do with it." I need use it and keep my precious people safe. Holding his sword back, he started channeling every ounce of this new power into it. He got a feeling of approval in the back of his mind, and just as the bandits started to recover from their shock at the terrible energy the boy before them was exuding, he swung. The gust of wind that had usually accompanied this technique before while practicing was nothing compared to the hurricane being unleashed now. The wind blew so hard it picked many of Gato's men right up off the ground before they were all cut down by a multitude of black streaks of energy. An instant later, every one of the attacking force was lying on the ground, dead, and Gato was nowhere to be seen. Naruto dropped to his knees tiredly while Zabuza cursed Gato's disappearance. Tsunade hurried over to her student and ran a quick diagnostic jutsu while the other leaf shinobi merely looked in disbelief at the havoc Naruto had caused. Tsunade helped him to his feet and they all made their way back to the house with Naruto's clones coming out of the trees to scavenge and seal away any items of use the dead bandits may have had on their persons before disposing of the bodies. That was its chakra, wasn't it? Naruto asked when they arrived back at the house. Tsunade nodded. We'll talk later, she signed back before heading upstairs to speak to Kurenai and Kakashi privately. Well, I think we can say that the test run of Naruto's Kunshugen went well, she surmised once the door was closed. In fact, it had gone better than well. Naruto had provided them with real-time insight into every opponent they were fighting, including observable weaknesses that, while not terribly helpful or hard to make, saved Kakashi and Kurenai the effort, making killing them that much more efficient, as well as keeping them up to date on their surroundings. Be that as it may, Kakashi replied. Why are you seemingly so unconcerned about Naruto using the Kyuubi's chakra? Because the point of having a tailed beast sealed inside you is to make use of the titanic amounts of extremely powerful chakra they have, Tsunade explained. But what about the Kyuubi? Kurenai asked. Aren't you worried it will try to take control of Naruto? Tsunade shook her head. Not in the least. Naruto's stronger than he looks. If anyone has the willpower to go toe-to-toe with the strongest of the tailed beasts, it's him. They were interrupted by a crash from downstairs. Rushing down in case Gato had returned with more men, they were treated to a different sight instead. Slouched against opposite walls were Kanagi and Sasuke. Kanagi was cradling a clearly broken hand while Sakura was fretting over Sasuke, who looked like his pride had been hurt than anything else. Standing between Kanagi and Kiba and Hinata was Naruto, glaring fiercely at him while completely ignoring Sasuke. What the hell is going on here? Tsunade demanded. Tsunade-san, your student attacked me and my teammate for no reason, Sasuke growled. No he didn't, Kiba shouted, spinning in place to face Sasuke. Yes he did, Kanagi countered. I was just trying to talk to Hinata when you got all territorial and he came in and broke my hand before sending me into the wall. Hinata was trying to get away from you, you creep. Kiba yelled. You've been harassing her since we got left the village. Akamaru was standing on his head yipping in agreement. That's a big word for a mutt. Kanagi shot back. Kiba was about to reply when Naruto growled lowly. Sensing what was about to happen, Tsunade released a little bit of killing intent, causing everyone in the room to freeze. Now that I have your attention, she said calmly, Tazuna, Zabuza, what happened here? Tazuna swallowed nervously at the look on her face before confirming Kiba's story. What the boy says is true, the one on the floor was getting a little too friendly for the little lady's liking. He couldn't help but glare at Kanagi for a moment, paternal instincts making his hackles rise as he remembered the few times Tsunami had found herself in that situation when she was younger. Naruto didn't appreciate him making the girl feel uncomfortable and was about to step in when that little pup there took a nip at Loverboy's hand, while the slightly bigger pup pushed him away. Loverboy didn't take too kindly to the dynamic duo throwing off his game, and the confrontation was about to get violent when Naruto moved in and caught his punch before throwing him at the wall. What about Sasuke? This one had tried to sneak up on the blonde brat during the confrontation and steal his sword, Zabuza explained with disgust. He of all people knew about the bond between a man and his blade. The blade didn't take too kindly to that, and a smaller version of whatever that attack was on the bridge cut up the boy's hand before throwing him away. Tsunade shook her head before looking at Naruto. He still hadn't taken his eyes off of Kanagi. Naruto, she called, getting his attention. You will join myself and Team 8 outside. Kakashi, while we're out there I hope you'll remind your students what proper shinobi behavior is. Kakashi nodded and scowled at his team while Kurenai followed Tsunade outside. Alright, explain yourselves, she ordered. It was as Tazuna-san said, Kurenai-sensei, Shino replied calmly. Every time we were alone, Sanjuro-san would attempt to solicit a date out of Hinata-san. This made Naruto start growling again. And after seeing how he reacted on the bridge, I thought it better if I put Kanagi in his place before Naruto got himself arrested for putting the son of a council member out of our misery, Kiba continued. That was awfully selfless of you, Kiba, Kurenai observed. She didn't think Kiba and Naruto got along very well. Yeah, well, I figured anyone who will take down an army of bandits to keep my teammates safe can't be all that bad. Plus, I've been wanting to knock that punk down a few pegs for a while now anyway. Alright, Tsunade nodded her head before turning to Naruto, so why did you hurt Kanagi? Naruto signed his response and Tsunade nodded with a sigh. Fine, I guess that's a decent response, but try to control your temper next time, okay? Naruto frowned petulantly but eventually acquiesced and nodded his head. Anyo, Tsunade-sama, what did he say? Hinata asked. He said that Kiba was his precious person because he protected Alheim, therefore Naruto couldn't allow Kanagi to hurt him. Alheim, Hinata stuttered, the heat rising to her face. Kiba snickered at the look on her face before turning and grinning at Naruto. What can I say, Naruto? We in Izuka are a loyal breed, we're loyal to our pack mates. They returned inside to join the others for dinner, ignoring the rather stormy expressions of Team 7 as they ate. Zabuza and Haku told them a bit about their pasts, and even Sasuke looked affected when they heard about the bloodline purges in the Land of Water and the death of Haku's family. Naruto looked quite angry at the thought of so many people being persecuted and killed for something that was out of control. Then he was struck by an idea and rapidly explained it to Tsunade. What's he doing with his hands? Haku asked. She had seen him gesticulate wildly several times since their truce in joining the Leaf Shinobi at the bridge builder's house. It's how he communicates, Kurenai explained. Meanwhile Tsunade translated his proposal to the rest of the group. He asked if we could bring Seki-chan and No Brows back to Konoha where they can become shinobi for the Leaf. Haku flushed at the nickname the boy had given her. He couldn't have been more than 3 years younger than her, yet there was something about him that made her gaze keep drifting back and made her feel like she would follow him to the ends of the earth. Zabuza meanwhile, growled at his own nickname before contemplating the offer. On one condition, he said. You let me help teach the brat the ways of the sword. Tsunade smirked. Zabuza had just made her life a whole lot easier by taking care of one of the items on her to-do list when they got back to Konoha. Deal. Anyo, Tsunade-sama, When did Naruto get a dojutsu? Hinata asked, causing most of the other genin to look at him in shock, and in a few cases, hidden outrage. I noticed with my Byakugan that he was directing chakra to his eyes. One only does that if they have a dojutsu. That was very observant, Hinata, Tsunade replied. Naruto is the wielder of a rather unique dojutsu called the Kunshugan. Unfortunately, you all aren't authorized to know much else about it, so that's all I can tell you at the moment. HMPH, that's ironic, Sasuke muttered venomously. He claims to hate the Sharingan, yet he has a dojutsu himself. Naruto Baka's probably just jealous that his dojutsu doesn't even compare to the Sharingan, Sakura added snidely. Naruto just rolled his eyes and stood up. He bowed to Tsunami in thanks for the meal before heading outside to prepare for the last leg of their mission. By the time Tsunade, Kakashi, Kurenai, Zabuza, and Haku joined him outside, he had restocked his equipment and was going through the various items he had looted off of Gado's thugs. Naruto handed Zabuza and Haku his communication seals and started explaining his plan to them all as they made their way quietly to the location of Gado's hideout. Gado's holed up in an old fort. Haku couldn't help but shiver as she heard the husky voice in her ear. My clones have made a bunch of explosive seals that will flush most of the enemies outside. The space between the fort and the wall around it is where No Brows will use his hidden mist jutsu and mow down the majority of the low-level guys. The smarter, stronger enemies will try to get out of the mist, so Seki-chan starts on top of the wall. Her Senbon will take care of anybody who jumps to get clear of the mist. Once they realize the fort's not collapsing, they will probably retreat back inside. At that point, my clones will give you any info you need on the missing nin you meet, and for the few A-rank ones, Suna-sensei will be there to lend a hand. The others were all impressed at the tactical and analytical skills Naruto displayed, particularly those who were aware of his reputation as a knucklehead. They reached the fort where Gado had holed himself up, and waited in the trees for Naruto's signal. Not long after they all got into position, Naruto activated the explosive seals. A deluge of localized explosions rocked the fort and the outer wall, conveying the sense that it was under attack from a much greater force while also not harming the structural integrity of the building. As predicted, hundreds of bandits rushed outside only to get lost in a sudden mist and mowed down as Zabuza plowed his way through them. Several tried escaping, either by jumping out of the mist, only to receive a Senbon made of ice to their vital areas courtesy of Haku, who had no problem zooming along the top of the outer wall to reach her next target, or running for the gate where Kakashi and Kurenai were waiting for them. Several minutes of wanton violence later and the majority of Gado's forces had been decimated. They made their way inside, and the true fighting began as missing nin of all shapes and sizes stood in their way. Their numbers were not nearly as large, but the variety and increased skill made this particular obstacle rather time-consuming and nearly impossible if they didn't have up to the minute knowledge of their surroundings and insight into the strengths and weaknesses of each of their enemies. Eventually, after nearly 2 hours of fighting, they had made their way to the highest level of the fort, where the door to Gado's panic room was located. They were all tired, and Kurenai could feel herself slowing down as she dodged another attack from the missing nin she was fighting. He had dark skin and a scratched-out cloud headband tied around his bald head. His thin, willowy frame was encased in a tight one-piece suit that was somewhat reminiscent of what Maida Guy wore, but instead of being dark green, it was purple and reinforced at key locations. Naruto had informed her that he was a high B-rank missing nin known as Mitsuhatsu and was known as the Tiger Snake. His moniker was not unearned, as landing a blow on him was even more frustrating than when she sparred against Anko. Meanwhile, the clawed gloves he wore on his hands were coated in fire chakra. She already had several minor burns all over from narrowly dodging his whirlwind of unpredictable strikes. "What's the matter, Ice Queen?" he taunted as she dodged yet another flaming swipe. "Not enough time to cast one of your genjutsu?" Kurenai growled in frustration. She started going through various hand seals when Mitsu charged at her with a smirk. She cursed herself for losing her cool, and prepared herself to be impaled. "At least he'll still be trapped in my technique," she thought bitterly. "One of the others can finish him off then." However, instead of being impaled, there was a poof of smoke and a loud clang. Looking around, she found herself suddenly next to Kakashi on the other end of the hallway where he and Naruto were fighting. "I guess that's one way to help me," Kakashi quipped. "This guy's defenses are too strong for Naruto or me to get through. But, if you can immobilize him with a genjutsu, then I can take him out." Realizing that Naruto must have used the substitution jutsu to switch places with her, Kurenai nodded and jumped out of the way of her new enemy's attack. The woman was much broader than her previous opponent, but other than that she couldn't make out any of her other features. She was covered from head to toe in a layer of stone that moved far quicker than expected and lashed out whenever one of them got too close, firing a small boulder at them like a cannonball. They made short work of her though, when Kurenai hit her with the illusion she had meant to use on Mitsu. The woman froze in place, and the chirping sound of Kakashi's Chidori echoed through the hall as he charged her, driving a lightning-coated hand right through her chest. Their enemy fell, and she realized with relief that Mitsu was the only one left. She turned around and watched as he and Naruto danced around each other, the sounds of their blades ringing against each other jarring her ears. "How the hell is he holding his own against Mitsu?" Zabuza asked as he limped down the hall to join them. Tsunade followed, carrying an unconscious Haku on her back. "Is she okay?" Kurenai asked. "Just exhausted," Zabuza replied. "Shouldn't you be helping your student? Mitsu's no pushover. Naru-kun and I have a deal. He knows he has backup should he need it." "Do you really think he'd ask for help, though?" Kakashi asked. "Maybe not from Kurenai, as he wouldn't want to risk getting his Tenshi-chan hurt," Tsunade teased, making Kurenai's face heat up from embarrassment. "But I think this is the first time he gets to test himself against an opponent who is both stronger and faster than him. He wants to prove that he can stand on his own." They watched as Mitsu pushed Naruto on the defensive, quickly making him lose ground. "I have to say, brat, you put up quite the fight, but it's over now." The flames covering Mitsu's claws focused from a raging orange to a tight oval of blue-tinged flame that melted the ground when he dug into it out while somersaulting. He quickly became a wheel of flame, kicking up molten rock as he charged at Naruto. Naruto swung his sword as fast as he could, dodging and deflecting the red-hot debris being flung at him. He chanced a glance at the others and sighed internally. It looked like the only way to win was to do something completely unexpected, even though that meant revealing another one of his deformities. Preparing himself as Mitsu drew ever closer, he dropped his sword into his left hand for a backhanded grip. Mitsu descended upon him the next second, one claw aiming high, and one aiming low. Kurenai shrieked as Naruto blocked the lower claw with his sword while, to the disbelief of all the onlookers, he caught the other in his bare hand. He didn't even react as Mitsu's claws slid between his fingers, igniting his glove and the sleeve of his hoodie. Mitsu's eyes were wide as the hand holding his claws was unmoving, completely unfazed by the extreme heat they radiated. In his distraction, He never noticed Naruto quietly release his restriction seals or the pressure against his other claw disappearing before Naruto separated his head from his body. He fell to the floor dead and Naruto turned back to grin sheepishly at his fellow shinobi. Tsunade just smiled and shook her head at her student's recklessness. Your arm's still on fire, Naru-kun. Reacting quickly, Naruto tore the remnants of his sleeve off his arm. What remained of his glove was little more than an orange bracelet, and even his mesh shirt underneath had slashes in it. This gave Kakashi, Kurenai, and Zabuza a decent look at the metallic black musculature of his right arm. Deciding to put off the annoying questions until after their job was done, Tsunade silenced them all with a look before strolling casually up to the reinforced steel door. Raising her hand, she knocked on it gently, sending it flying off its hinges and into the wall opposite it. She then turned around and followed Naruto back the way they came, leaving the others to deal with Gato. They were only the backup, after all. Ooh, there was much celebration before they left the Land of Waves. Naruto's clones had cleaned out Gato's fort and freed all his prisoners as well as collecting and redistributing the vast wealth he found hidden away there. Tsunami in particular was thankful, as he gave her several documents representing Gato's shares in various companies, effectively letting her turn his empire into a force for good. Naruto had managed to put off explaining his arm for now, and thanks to the self-repairing seals he put on all of his clothes, his arm was concealed once more before anyone else could see it. After 2 weeks, they finally had the bridge restored. Many of the people who lived in the surrounding area came to see them off, and Inari even hugged Naruto, tearfully thanking him for giving hope back to the people of Wave. Naruto smiled and ruffled Inari's hair before turning and joining the others. They made decent time on the way back, with all of the genin now having the chakra control to hop from tree to tree instead of walking or running along the road. They estimated they would arrive in Konoha around noon the next day when they finally stopped to make camp. They ate a quick dinner before Naruto sat down to continue teaching Kurenai, Hinata, and Haku's sign language. The other two had quickly caught up to where Kurenai was, and like her they blushed prettily. In Hinata's case she even fainted and didn't wake up for several minutes when he showed them the signs for his nicknames for them. The happy atmosphere was shattered though when Sasuke stomped over to stand over Naruto. Give me the sword, Dobi, he demanded. Genin Uchiha, Kurenai snapped angrily. That blade is Naruto's. You have no right to demand any trophies from another shinobi that were won in combat. But he didn't win it, Sasuke retorted. Tsunade-san won it, and allowed him to keep it. That's why I'm giving you one chance, Dobi. Give me the sword, or I'll win it from you. Just give him the sword, Uzumaki, Kanagi exclaimed in annoyance. Think of your village. Yeah, Naruto Baka. Give it to Sasuke-kun. If it's as strong as everyone said it is, it would be put to much better use with someone who could use it. Naruto just rolled his eyes and signed an apology to the girls before standing up and walking towards his bedroll. Sasuke growled at his back, sick of constantly getting the brush off from someone who was so beneath him. He reached into his pouch and hurled a kunai. Everyone expected it to be aimed at Naruto, and reacted as such, but to their surprise the knife was on a collision course with an unsuspecting Haku, who had turned to watch Naruto as he left. Fortunately for her, there was a poof of smoke and instead of burying itself in her back, the kunai sunk into Naruto's thigh all the way to the hilt as he substituted himself with her. Not even Tsunade had a chance to get angry before the oppressive pressure of the Kyuubi's chakra forced all the genin to their knees and even made Kurenai, Kakashi, and Zabuza sweat. Big mistake, Naruto growled lowly, his Kunshugan spinning wildly as the orange in it was tinted with a dark red and his whiskers grew even thicker. Blood-red chakra started to leak from his pores and cover him. He threw his right arm forward to punch Sasuke in the face, but was stopped as Tsunade grabbed him by the wrist. Even so, the force behind the punch was enough to knock Sasuke back with a powerful gust of wind, sending him flying into a nearby tree. Tsunade spun him into her and wrapped her arms around him tightly as she whispered in his ear soothingly. "Calm down, Naru-kun, it's fine. You can calm down now." The surge of chakra forced the seal on Naruto's throat to activate, allowing those who had the receiver seals to listen sadly as he muttered brokenly into Tsunade's shoulder. He was going to hurt her. "I need to protect her. I need to protect all of them." "It's okay, Naru-kun," Tsunade replied. "You saved her. Haku's fine. What if it was Tenshi-chan? Or Aoheim? What if I wasn't fast enough? What if? But you were fast enough, Naruto-kun," Kurenai whispered as she approached him. The oppressive power he was radiating was slowly fading as their words got through to him. Tsunade turned Naruto to face Haku, who gladly embraced him as his chakra cloak faded away. "Thank you for saving me, Naruto-kun. You don't have to be angry anymore. You protected me." With that, the last of the Kyuubi's chakra died down and Naruto's Kenshugan deactivated. He sighed happily as he held Haku close before slipping into unconsciousness. Naruto ran as fast as he could from them. He didn't know how he ended up in this sewer or why the faceless mob seemed to have waited until he had gotten to his feet to start jeering and chasing him, but he was too busy to care. Memories of some of the more harsh beatings flashed before his eyes, the all-too-familiar rush of fear fueling him to run faster as he rounded another corner. Unfortunately, the mob always seemed to be right on his tail, and were steadily gaining ground. He stumbled slightly as the memory of hiding in a tree during his 6th birthday, the pain from his usual beating dwarfed by the cold loneliness in his heart as he wondered to himself yet again why no one but the old man and the Ichirakus ever wished him a happy birthday. Tears blurred his vision as he tripped and fell into a massive chamber. He hurried back to his feet and didn't even think as he sprinted across the room between two massive bars. He didn't stop until he ran face first into a massive furry wall. "Wait, furry." He looked up as he took notice of the steady, heavy breathing. Staring down at him were a pair of glowing red eyes, the pupils dilated into tiny slits as they observed him. "So, my container finally comes to visit me." Naruto was frozen as the fox spoke, revealing teeth the size of small houses. "You must be either very brave or very foolish to willingly run in here, Kit." "More like very afraid with a hint of foolishness," Naruto replied as he turned around to see his attackers had stopped about 20 feet from the cage, waiting silently for him to come back out. His attention was drawn back to the fox as it let out a great booming laugh. "You're funny, Kit." The Kyuubi turned its attention to the specters outside its cage and growled as it let out a pulse of chakra. The ghosts wavered and disappeared, like smoke in a hurricane, and a moment later it turned its attention back on the first human it had ever sworn to help willingly. "You know, Kit, you seem awfully calm for your first introduction to the cause of all of your suffering, not to mention that I could destroy you with less effort than it takes to breathe." Naruto shrugged. "If you wanted to kill me, I'd already be dead by now. Also, you're not the cause for my suffering, the villagers who hurt me are. But they only hurt you because they can't tell the difference between us. Not whether of our faults if they're stupid." The Kyuubi released another bellowing laugh, making the water ripple and the ground Naruto was sitting on shake. "You've sure got some guts, Kit, I'll give you that." Naruto grinned and scratched the back of his head. Thanks, Pops. Pops? The Kyuubi asked incredulously. Naruto's grin faded slightly as he looked away awkwardly. Why yeah, you keep calling me kid, which is the word for a baby fox, and you seem nice and you sent the people chasing me away so. He trailed off quietly and the Kyuubi felt a soft smile pull at its snout. It knew how starved for affection Naruto was and how badly he wanted a family. Its mind made up, it gently lowered one of its titanic tails and wrapped it around him, pulling him close as he curled up on the ground. Alright, then. Naruto whipped his head around and stared at it in wide-eyed shock before a shining grin found its way to his face while a couple tears slid down his cheeks. He sat there for a couple minutes, basking in the feeling of acceptance before his attention was turned back to the bars of his new father figure's cage. Hey, Pops, the Kyuubi grunted, cracking an eye open to show it was listening before shutting it again. If you're here, and I can talk to you without my throat hurting, does that mean we're inside my mind? Yup, the Kyuubi replied, opening its eye back up to see at what its new son was getting at. It watched as he shut his eyes in concentration before shooting to its feet, taking care to place him on its snout as a bright light started to shine down from above and the water below its feet dried up. It watched in amazement as the bars to its cage transformed from cold iron to thick, knotted wood. The walls of the sewer fell away as the bright light above them focused into a sunlit, blue sky dotted with the occasional fluffy white cloud. Beneath its feet, the Kyuubi could feel grass start to grow as more and more wooden poles shot up from the ground in either direction as far as the eye could see. The poles then began to morph as roots plunged into the ground at their bases, while branches shot out all over the rest of them. Once he had finished, Naruto looked around to take in what he had made. The bars of the Kyuubi's cage had been replaced by an endless line of gargantuan fir trees that dwarfed even the titanic fox. Stretching into the horizon were massive rolling hills, covered in rich, green grass. To their right was a giant lake surrounded by city-sized rocks for the fox to lay on and bathe in the heat of the artificial sun. Kit, this is astounding. Thank you. Naruto smiled at mixture of awe and happiness in the Kyuubi's giant eyes. Just consider it my thanks for patching me up all those times. Now, if you don't mind me asking, why'd you attack Konoha on my birthday? The Kyuubi shifted its attention from the wonderful gift its kid had given it, and focused on the boy sitting cross-legged on its snout. I can't tell you much at the moment, Kit, but I will tell you that I didn't do it willingly. Naruto smiled in understanding. That's okay, Pops. I'm glad that you didn't do it on purpose, and I can wait until you're ready. For now, I think I should get back. I don't want to worry Suna-sensei too much. Bye. The Kyuubi smiled as he waved and faded out of existence. It certainly hadn't expected to be handed the role of Naruto's father figure when it noticed him finally entering his mindscape. It didn't know anything really about being a father, but it swore that it would do everything in its power to help Naruto achieve his goals. Ooh. Groaning, Naruto woke up in what he knew to be the living room of the small apartment Tsunade and Shizune rented not too far from his own building. Tsunade had decided to live there instead of the Senju compound as it kept her out of the public eye more, and allowed her to be closer to Naruto should he need her. Speaking of his sensei, Naruto watched as she came out of the attached kitchen, a bowl of what smelled like ramen in her hands. Looks like someone's finally awake, she noted with a smile. Naruto nodded and accepted the bowl with a thanks. His normal fervent eating was slowed significantly as he explained to Tsunade what had happened. He even abandoned it entirely as he enthusiastically signed to her about the Kyuubi accepting him as a sort of surrogate son. Tsunade couldn't help but laugh and shake her head. She knew the Kyuubi had sworn an oath to help Naruto, but leave it to him to find the acceptance of a father in a mountain-sized fox. I'm happy for you, Naru-kun, she replied once he was finished. Now hurry up and eat. Team 8 has invited us for another day of joint training as soon as you woke up. Naruto nodded and scarfed down his ramen before throwing on his gear. On their way to the training ground, Tsunade explained that during the day he had been unconscious. Zabuza and Haku had been taken to the T&I headquarters to begin the process of becoming Leaf Shinobi, and confirming their loyalty to Konoha. When they arrived, Naruto was surprised to see someone else there along with Kurenai and her team. She wore a long, tan trench coat over a tight mesh shirt and a short, orange skirt. Her long, purple hair was pulled up in a messy ponytail, but what really drew his attention were her eyes. The brown pools shone with happiness, as she spoke with Kurenai, but he could easily see past the thin veil and see the same pain and loneliness and desperation for acceptance that he saw in his own eyes when he looked in the mirror. Kurenai stopped listening to Anko as she noticed Naruto and Tsunade approaching. She was filled with relief at the sight of him walking, and seemingly unharmed. Her students stopped their light sparring match as they too noticed him and ran up to him with anxious questions concerning his health. Tsunade explained that he was just fine and they walked over to Anko to introduce themselves. Naruto-kun, this is my good friend, Anko Mitarashi, Kurenai said. Anko, this is Tsunade-sama and her apprentice Naruto Uzumaki. So this is the brat that Kur-chan's been making doe eyes over for the past few weeks, Anko said with a wry smirk as she looked Naruto over from head to toe. Kurenai blushed and lightly smacked her friend on the shoulder. Anko, I have not. Naruto was oblivious to her embarrassment and quickly signed to her while Tsunade translated. He said, "It's nice to meet you, hubby Hana, I know we'll get along well together." Anko gaped at the nickname while Kurenai had her turn to snicker at her friend's reaction. There was no trace of fear or distrust in his eyes. Instead she saw only understanding. It then occurred to her that he of all people would understand what it felt like to be isolated and hated simply due to your association with the real object of the villagers, hatred. Smiling softly, Anko looked into his eyes and nodded, a simple message of thanks and an offer of support from someone who understood the other's situation. Now that the introductions are through, Tsunade said, gaining everyone's attention. Naruto has a few gifts for the members of Team 8. Naruto nodded and reached into his pockets to pull out 4 separate sealing scrolls and handed one to each of the members of Team 8. Shino unsealed his first and an eyebrow as several jutsu scrolls and a bundle of papers with seals on them appeared in front of him. For you, Shino, there are a few earth and wind jutsu that should be helpful in controlling the flow of battle and moving your opponent where you want them for your bugs to take them out. Normally your clan doesn't use regular jutsu for fear of hurting your bugs, but these are all relatively easy to control earth and wind techniques, so the risk should be greatly reduced. Those seals are ones that Naruto designed himself for creating various traps. Together with those techniques and your bugs, you should be able to make yourself ready to take on most opponents. Shino nodded in thanks before opening one of the jutsu scrolls and starting to read it over. Hinata was next as she unsealed her scroll. Hinata, there are a couple scrolls on the crane taijutsu style as well as a few beginner ones on tai chi. Naruto noticed that your movements were too stiff when you fought and thought that these could help you develop a style that was more suited to you. Also, we managed to find you a rather nice bow, which Naruto has taken the liberty of enhancing with several different seals. With your Byakugan, it would be foolish not to master some form of long-range combat. Thank you, Tsunade-sama, Naruto-kun. But my clan would never allow this. If they found out I broke tradition and used a weapon like this, or took such liberties as modifying the gentle fist, then I guess it's in your best interest that they don't find out, isn't it? Tsunade asked teasingly. Besides, Naruto confirmed that the teachings of a Jonin sensei always supersede those of the Genin's clan. So, if you were to say Kurenai ordered you to train with the bow, then they would have no choice but to allow it. Kurenai finished. She beamed at the brilliance of Naruto's plan. Naruto also handed Hinata a seal. Put it on, he signed. What does it do? Naruto said it was a substitution seal. He wouldn't tell me the conditions for it activating, but apparently when they are met, you will be substituted with a log that Naruto has hidden somewhere. He's been very tight-lipped about it, which usually means a severe headache for Sarutobi-sensei, but he was rather adamant about you placing it on yourself. Hinata looked into Naruto's eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. Nodding, she leaned down and wrapped the seal around her ankle. There was a brief flash of chakra, and when she pulled the paper away, both it and her leg were blank. She started testing out the quality of her bow while Kiba unsealed his scroll. Kurenai gasped as she recognized the pair of bladed gloves that appeared in Kiba's hands. Kiba, these gloves have the ability to channel your chakra. With them, your clan techniques should be even more deadly. Tsunade-sama, are you sure about giving Kiba those? Kurenai asked. I don't see why not, Tsunade replied. Everything Naruto has given you was found in Gato's hideout. He won that bow and those gloves off of 2 different missing nin he killed. By law they're his to do with as he sees fit. The other genin were surprised that Naruto had actually defeated not 1, but at least 2 missing nin himself. If that's true, then why give them to us? Kiba asked. Easiest way to protect you, Naruto rasped. Help you protect yourselves. He's got a point, Kur-chan, Anko added. Come on, unseal yours, I wanna see what you got. Kurenai sighed and unsealed her own scroll and found a Senbon launcher and a small ninja too. The Senbon launcher should help you get used to executing those who get trapped in your illusions from a distance, and the blade should help with close-quartered combat. Suan said, personally I also suggest you improve your strength, speed, stamina, and taijutsu. You may be a Jonin, but you'll never get past your current level unless you start expanding and increasing your training in fields other than your specialization. Kurenai nodded, humbled at being dressed down in front of her students. Her spirits were lifted, though, when Naruto got her attention and started signing slowly. Don't be sad, Tenshi-chan, it just means you have to train harder. Smiling once more, Kurenai nodded. They quickly got underway, and by the time lunch rolled around, the members of Team 8 were exhausted from Tsunade's constant drilling and practicing with the gifts Naruto had given them. Over lunch, Naruto gave Kurenai and Hinata another lesson in sign language. Kiba, Shino, and even Anko followed along, and by the time lunch was finished, they had all asked if Naruto could continue to give them lessons some other time. Naruto beamed and nodded enthusiastically, more than happy to help his friends better understand him. Unfortunately, the happy moment was cut short as an Anbu appeared before them in a swirl of leaves. Genin Uzumaki, you have been summoned to appear before the council. Naruto sighed and nodded to the Anbu who disappeared as he stood to his feet. He looked at Tsunade, and she nodded, grabbing his shoulder as she shunshined them both to the Hokage Tower. They both walked up the steps and down several halls before coming to a stop in front of the council chambers. Now just remember, keep your cool. You know better than anyone in the village what they can and can't do. Don't let them take away your control. Naruto nodded and took a deep breath. He created a quick shadow clone who took off in the direction of the Hokage's office. He pushed open the doors and she followed him into the dark room. Tsunade immediately frowned as she noticed that the only people present at the large horseshoe-shaped table were the members of the civilian council, Koharu and Homura, the elderly advisors to the Hokage, and Danzo. Tsunade-sama, what are you doing here? One of the counselors asked. We only sent out a summons for him. Naruto began signing and Tsunade translated with a smile on her face. As you are all well aware, I am unable to speak. To account for my handicap, Suna-sensei has volunteered to be my interpreter. We don't care why she's here, boy, she is trespassing on a council meeting that has nothing to do with her. Actually, Naruto signed. As my interpreter, Suna-sensei is given clearance to go wherever I go, as well as be privy to whatever information I am briefed on. How do we know she's properly translating those wild gesticulations of yours? Homura asked. Because she has registered herself as a translator with the Hokage, Naruto replied. What you are doing hardly warrants an actual language, Koharu replied snidely. Besides, the clearance given to translators is only applicable to foreign diplomats. I think you'll find that it doesn't. Naruto smirked. The law only states that translators are to accompany their charges to all meetings and keep their thoughts and opinions to themselves for the duration of any interaction involving a language barrier unless directly addressed. As for your claim that my method of communication does not classify as a language, not only is there no definition of what constitutes a different language in any of Konoha's laws, there is a precedent to communicating via hand signals as it is the recommended method of communication between high-level shinobi while in enemy territory or when there is concern of being overheard. Several members became red-faced at Naruto's legal maneuvering. Danzo, on the other hand, merely shifted in his seat and observed the boy more closely. While you may have a point from a legal standpoint, Uzumaki, this just further confirms one of the many complaints and charges that have been laid against you. I'll be more than happy to hear these complaints once the Hokage arrives. The Hokage doesn't have the time to deal with the likes of you, Koharu spoke. As his advisors, we will speak for him in this matter. Tsunade clenched her teeth to keep from yelling out when the door flew open and the Hokage strolled in. What exactly is going on here? The cool tone of his voice rang through the air, making several council members sweat with fear. Hokage-sama, I was just explaining that as a shinobi of the leaf, any charges laid against me had to be presented in front of you as the affairs of the shinobi forces falls directly under you. Hiruzen scowled and made his way around the table to take a seat in the center. You are, of course, correct, Naruto-kun, he said as he took out his pipe. And I'm sure our esteemed council members are aware that matters concerning shinobi are not within their jurisdiction, but seeing how there are several things that do need to be discussed, I will allow them to stay while we wait for the clan heads of the shinobi council. Naruto and Tsunade waited patiently as one by one the various clan heads arrived and took their seats opposite the civilian council. What is this about, Hokage-sama? Hiyashi Hyuga asked once everyone was seated. There are several issues that need to be discussed concerning Genin Naruto Uzumaki, and seeing as the civilian half of our council decided to invite him, I figured we might as well deal with it all now. So if we might begin. I would like to discuss the reports that Genin Uzumaki has apparently acquired a previously unknown dojutsu, Danzo said, interrupting Hiruzen. Naruto narrowed his eyes suspiciously but said nothing as Hiruzen called the room to order, seemingly unsuccessfully. The yelling from both sides of the room when Naruto took a step back and activated his Kunshugen. So it's true, Sume Inuzuka muttered. She couldn't help but look away from the swirling golden glow of Naruto's eyes. She felt something in the back of her head. It was similar to when she was younger, and there were still those who could show their dominance over her, but there was something distinctly different. Many of the other clan heads felt the same as Naruto looked around the room. Hokage-sama, I propose we put the boy into a breeding program. It would be beneficial to the. Hiruzen shook his head and cut Danzo off. No, Konoha will not be another village known for breeding people as livestock to increase its power. Hiashi scowled. What exactly does this new dojutsu do? Suna-sensei and I are still experimenting with its abilities, but so far we have seen that it grants enhanced vision as well as an increase in observational and analytical abilities. Alright, well I trust you will let me know of any further discoveries, Naruto-kun. Now what was this I heard about charges being laid against you? Hokage-sama, this boy attacked Sasuke Uchiha and my son Kanagi during their mission to the Land of Waves. Because of him, my son suffered from a shattered hand, while Sasuke Uchiha had several cuts along his. I demand justice for my son's pain and suffering. Hiruzen frowned and examined Naruto standing calmly before him. Is that claim true, Genin Uzumaki? In the broadest sense, yes, Hokage-sama, I am responsible for the injuries to two of the members of Team 7. Though if you want to be technical about it, Genin Uchiha's injuries could be classified as self-inflicted. How so? Naruto drew his sword from his belt, frowning as he reminded himself to go and get a sheath for it sometime soon. While occupied with Genin Sanjuro, Genin Uchiha tried to take my sword from me. The sword reacted on its own and repelled his attempts to take it. And we're just supposed to believe that? One of the civilians with a familiar shade of pink hair shouted. It is not unprecedented for certain powerful shinobi tools to react harmfully towards those who are not its current wielder, Shibi Aburame said, his voice a cool monotone. Who did you even steal that sword from anyway, boy? Hiashi asked. Ryosuke of the Black Death. You lie. You expect us to believe that you, a mere genin less than a year out of the academy, defeated an A- rank missing nin. Naruto shook his head and let out a breathy chuckle. I never said I did. Suna-sensei killed him. She allowed me to keep the sword. Hiruzen noticed the significant look Tsunade gave him and decided to move the meeting along. What about Genin Sanjuro? I noticed Genin Sanjuro making unsolicited advances on Genin Hyuga and was about to step in when Genin Inuzuka beat me to the punch. He forced himself between the two and told Genin Sanjuro to back off. The two argued and it quickly escalated. Genin Sanjuro threw a punch but I quickly caught it as I broke the two up. Then how do you explain all his knuckles being broken and several fingers being fractured and dislocated? Kanagi's father shouted. I reacted to the situation as I would any other combat situation, Naruto replied. As such, I merely reached up and caught your son's punch in the palm of my right hand. It's not my fault if his fist broke on impact. Why you little? Kanagi's father was cut off as Hiruzen released a small trickle of killing intent. That's enough. I've heard all I need to and I'm dropping all charges against Genin Uzumaki. Now seeing as this meeting was never on my schedule due to what I'm sure was simply a clerical error, I need to get back to work. As such, this meeting is now dismissed. The council members left with many of the civilians grumbling, but Naruto's attention was fixed on Danzo, who kept watching him until he left with Tsunade and Hiruzen. The three of them made their way to the Hokage's office where Tsunade started with giving her report of the events that had happened since they had last seen him. Hiruzen was interested to learn about their theory concerning the origin of Naruto's sword, as well as the strange resonating he felt in his arm. That is very interesting indeed, Hiruzen mumbled as he reached into his desk and pulled out a scroll. Here, Naruto-kun. Amaterasu-sama left this with me the night she saved you. Hopefully it will tell you more about the abilities your new gifts grant you. Naruto accepted the scroll and unrolled it. He quickly activated his Kunshugen and began reading. The Kunshugen is a unique dojutsu only bestowed upon those deemed worthy by the gods. It cannot be inherited genetically and will only be bestowed upon the one who has shown the potential of a true leader. As the eye of a monarch, the Kunshugen grants the wielder the passive ability to observe their surroundings and situations with unprecedented detail. The user is also granted with an increase of natural analytical skills as well as instincts so honed that it is impossible for them to be lied to. The Kunshugen, as a gift from the gods themselves, has a plethora of abilities that make it greater than any other dojutsu. The first is the ability to make time stop. So long as the user remains still, time will cease to move, allowing the user to take their time to properly analyze their enemy and develop a counter strategy. Second, as the eye of Amaterasu herself, the Kunshugen allows the user to see chakra. As this ability is trained and more points of the sun reveal themselves, the understanding of chakra and all its many forms will become almost instinctive, surpassing all other ocular jutsu. The third ability of the Kunshugen is to grant the user complete control over their chakra. At its base level, the wielder of the Kunshugen can open and close various chakra points along their body, as well as control the flow of their chakra to prevent it from being unwillingly siphoned. Use the Kunshugen with caution. While it may be the most powerful of ocular jutsu, it is a gift from the gods. Only those who have proven themselves to have an unshakable will and a pure soul can make use of its power. However, the Kunshugen is not the only gift that has been bestowed upon this earth. If you are reading this scroll, then you have been deemed worthy to wield it. As such, we beseech you to find the other gifts carrying the mark of Amaterasu and save them from their lives of obscurity and servitude to unworthy masters. A great change is coming, the only question is whether it will be towards harmony or discord. Naruto relayed what he had read to other two and Hiruzen frowned. I don't like this idea of some great thing coming and affecting the world. Especially if we don't know how to prepare for it. The best we can do is train to be as strong as we can, Tsunade said. We've already found one of these gifts, and I can personally account for how powerful it is. You may be right, Tsunade, Hiruzen sighed as Naruto started signing. Gigi, I've got a request. Ooh. The next 3 weeks passed in relative ease. Zabuza and Haku were cleared to join the ranks of Leaf Shinobi as Chunin and Genin respectively. Even though they both were far above the level of the average shinobi of their rank, the Hokage decided that they needed to prove themselves loyal to Konoha first. Once they were cleared, they immediately took to training with Naruto and Tsunade. Zabuza started training Naruto in the ways of the sword, but he was shocked when the boy said he didn't want to learn any formal kenjutsu style. Tsunade asked him why and he shrugged, saying something was telling him to create his own style of both kenjutsu and taijutsu. They had agreed, though Naruto still was forced to learn from scrolls on various styles as he started work on developing the first of his styles. Anko would also join in on their training whenever she had the time. She would help out where she could, but for the most part she just enjoyed spending time with someone who was so open and accepting towards her. Tsunade had also started him on training with his chakra natures. Each day, a contingent of shadow clones would work on one of the 5 elements. Haku would occasionally help him with both his wind and his water as well as speed training. She was impressed that he could almost keep up with her with his resistance seals on, and shuddered to think of how fast he moved on the days where he and Tsunade went all out in private. Today, Naruto was in a sparring match against Team 10. Team 8 was out on another C-rank mission and Tsunade wasn't about to let Team 7 anywhere near her student. Kakashi seemed to have started warming up to Naruto, though, as he would occasionally drop by their training, offering Naruto tips on whatever jutsu he was working on. Tsunade watched as Naruto dodged Shikamaru's shadows, blocking Choji's enlarged hand with a gust of wind only to freeze as Ino's mind transfer technique seemed to work. Shikamaru released a sigh as he captured Naruto with his shadows only to be surprised when Naruto disappeared in a puff of smoke. Meanwhile, the real Naruto burst from the ground under Ino and quickly forced her arms behind her back as he pressed his blade to her throat. Ino squawked in surprise and Asuma dropped his cigarette. The Ino Shika Cho trio was famous for its teamwork and impeccable strategies, but Naruto had just disassembled and outmaneuvered them like it was child's play. Of course he too could see Naruto was going easy on his students, but that just made him even more curious as to how strong Naruto really was. They broke for lunch and Team 10 bid them farewell as they went to prepare for the C-rank mission they were supposed to be leaving for the next day. So how did that new style of yours work in a fight with someone smarter than you? Tsunade asked as they headed for the ramen stand. Still needs some work, Naruto signed. Controlling the flow of my chakra is hard enough without transforming it. Though the training with No Brows Sensei and Seki-chan has really been helping. Do you think you'd be good enough to go against the Sharingan yet? Maybe not Kakashi Sensei, but I wouldn't mind testing myself against the Tem. They finished lunch before heading to the Hokage Tower to see if there were any C-rank missions they could help out on. As it turned out, there was another Genin team that had requested some backup defending a group of businessmen who had gotten together to discuss a possible merger of their companies. They accepted the mission and went back to their apartments to gather their supplies before joining Zabuza, Haku, and Shizune, who had a rare day off, back at Training Ground 43. They trained for the rest of the day before breaking for dinner. They all ate dinner together at Tsunade and Shizune's apartment before Tsunade and Naruto bid them farewell and left the village under the cover of night. They ran for several hours before stopping for the night. Naruto spent the night talking with the Kyuubi as he did almost every night while his body slept. He told it about how his training was going and other inane things, but the giant fox listened intently. It even offered its input and suggestions for some of his training. The next day they arrived at their destination just before noon. It was a large mansion with an ornate garden and a 15-foot, iron fence surrounding the massive property. A servant let them through the gate and led them through the conspicuously empty grounds to the front door of the mansion. Once inside they were led through a veritable maze of doors and hallways before coming to a stop at what looked to be just another in a long set of identical oak doors they had seen. Your compatriots are through this door. You will be staying in this room with them while you are guarding the discussions, the servant explained rather snootily. He turned with a flourish and walked back the way they came while Tsunade opened the door. Inside the rather spacious room were several simple beds, leading Tsunade to believe they were in the servants' quarters. Standing in opposite corners of the room were Genin teams from both the Land of Fire and the Land of Earth. In the right-hand corner nearest the door stood Team 9. The Hyuga boy looked unhappy to even have to share the same air with any of them, while the girl in the twin buns on top of her head and the slim dress glared at the team across the room. Standing behind them on their hands were Maeda Guy and his apprentice, both seemingly oblivious to the situation. In the far left corner stood the team from the land of Earth. They consisted of a short, thin girl with black hair that went to her face and framed her face. She had dark brown eyes and stood with her arms crossed as she inspected the new arrivals. While she looked at them warily, her teammates looked downright scornful. The first was a short boy with pale, brown eyes and extremely short chocolate brown hair. He barely came up to the first girl's shoulder, but what he lacked in height, he more than made up for in girth. He hid it well under long, baggy robes, but Tsunade's well-trained eye saw past it. From the way the robe stretched and creased in certain areas, she could tell the boy was almost entirely composed out of bulky, well-toned muscle. The other genin was almost the complete opposite of him. She was taller than Naruto, who had grown to be a decent height for his age, due in no small part to Tsunade and Shizune helping him regulate his diet with a thin willowy frame. She had long, frizzy hair the color of rust, and thick, round glasses that made her eyes look quite large. She wore a baggy, muddy red tracksuit that covered her from head to toe and had a pair of long, wicked-looking scimitars strapped across her back. What really drew her attention, though, was their sensei. She immediately recognized his thick, crimson armor and the large metal furnace he wore on his back. The completely apathetic look in his eye confirmed what she already knew. His name was Han, Jinchuriki of the five-tailed dolphin horse. Guy looked up as the door closed and smiled at the new arrivals. Greetings, Tsunade-sama. Student of Tsunade-sama, I and my team are most grateful for youthful haste in arriving here. Naruto an eyebrow at the strange man. He waved to the members of Team 9, turning away as two of them simply glared at him while the other just went on with his push-ups, unaware of Naruto's silent greeting. Facing the team from Iowa, Naruto focused in on their sensei. Something about him seemed familiar, and he couldn't help but stare at the man, even as their eyes met. Kit, that man is a Jinchuriki, like you. He has the 5 tails sealed inside him. Naruto mentally thanked his father for the information before walking up to the man and smiling. Han observed the boy in front of him with distaste. There was something familiar about him, but he couldn't quite place his finger on it. He decided to be wary of him, especially considering he had just arrived accompanied by a Sannin. Hey punk, back off from our sensei. The stout boy growled as he roughly shoved Naruto back. Naruto was unfazed as he ran back to Tsunade and began signing rapidly. What is he doing? Han asked dispassionately. It's how he communicates, Tsunade explained. He's excited to meet you. Why would a genin from that village of tree huggers be interested in you, Han-sensei? The tall girl asked. Naruto thought about how to discreetly inform Han of their similarities without alerting those that didn't know. Not coming up with an immediate answer, he settled for talking to Han in private later and introduced himself to the other shinobi from Iowa. Greetings, Naruto Uzumaki, I am Han. These are my students, Osada, Kamuro, and Kuratsuchi. Han pointed to the boy followed by the 2 girls in turn as he introduced them. I am already acquainted with you, Tsunade Senju. Naruto turned back to face Tsunade. You know Han ni. Tsunade was confused by the strangely familiar way Naruto addressed a man he had just met. We fought several times in the war. Naruto frowned, saddened that they had been forced to meet under such conditions. Tsunade turned to Guy, who had been watching the interactions with intrigue. The report you sent was a little vague. Could you inform us as to why you called for backup? Yes, Tsunade-sama, we called you here because we captured a missing nin as she tried to infiltrate the meeting between the 2 business moguls. She is being interrogated right now, but our youthful colleagues from Iowa informed us that she is generally known to operate with a larger group of mercenaries. Tsunade nodded. If that's all we know at the moment, Naruto and I are going to get some training in before dinner. Naruto grinned and ran after her as they opened a window and jumped down to the expansive grounds behind the mansion. The second he landed, he launched himself at her while creating various clones to watch the battle through their Kunshugan. They traded blows while the members of Team 9 decided to follow them down and watch, leaving Han's team back in the quarters as most of them didn't want anything to do with anyone from Konoha. Guy was impressed at Naruto's never-give-up attitude as he was sent sprawling across the ground yet again. He would immediately get up and charge back in. Inspired by his perseverance, he immediately started training himself, grinning when Lee joined him in running laps around the estate on their hands. Neji grunted and walked off to find a place to train in private, and Tenten remained, torn between admiration for finally seeing her idol in person, and jealousy for not getting to be in the boy's place. She watched as he drew a sword more beautiful than she had ever seen and couldn't help but squeal as she ran into the middle of the sparring match to examine it. Naruto watched, confused as the panda-haired girl ran into his sparring match. "Where did you get that sword?" she demanded as she got uncomfortably close and started to examine every inch of the weapon. "We won it off a missing nin we killed on our last mission out of the village," Tsunade replied. "It's exquisite. What's its name?" Naruto raised an eyebrow, not understanding the question. "We don't know if it has a name or not," Tsunade said. She chuckled as Naruto looked completely out of his depth with Tenten so close to him. Tenten huffed. "That won't do. You've gotta give a sword this nice a name." Her eyes burned with fiery passion that made Naruto smile and nod his head. He looked down at his blade, carefully examining the dark blade, the golden sun-themed guard, and the deep red fabric wrapping the hilt. He knew what to name it. He quickly sheathed the sword and signed his choice to Tsunade. "That's an excellent name, Naru-kun." "What?" Tenten asked. "What did he call it?" Tsunade smiled at the young kunoichi's enthusiasm. It wasn't often nowadays to meet a kunoichi her age who actually took her shinobi duties seriously. "He says that he's going to call it Eclipse." Tenten looked like she was about to burst as she rounded back on Naruto. "That's so cool. Do you think you could spar with me? I use all sorts of different weapons, so I might be able to show you a thing or two." Naruto nodded enthusiastically, drawing the newly Eclipse once more as Tsunade went to stand just outside the ring of clones. Tenten opened strong, opening a giant sealing scroll and unsealing a barrage of kunai and shuriken which Naruto avoided by spinning, ducking, and jumping in a seemingly erratic manner. Eventually, Tenten switched to a pair of large Fuma shuriken attached to ninja wire that she threw around like giant deadly yo-yos. Again, Naruto dodged over and over, making Tenten get increasingly frustrated. She had been going at full steam right from the start, and this rookie hadn't even used his sword yet. She smiled as she threw her shuriken out once more, one on top of the other so that he would be forced to block them, but he surprised her yet again by jumping at the perfect moment and spinning flat in between the two shuriken. A quick swipe of his sword while in that position sent her Fuma shuriken flying off as he sliced through the wire. She quickly unsealed a bow staff only to find that he was just as elusive in close range as long range. Every strike seemed to just miss as he spun out of the way while he continued to land quick shallow cuts that steadily drained her of her energy. It didn't take long before she was on her knees, gasping for breath as several wounds on her arms and legs bled lightly. Tsunade walked up and started healing her and she couldn't help but notice that Naruto barely looked ruffled. He had only taken a few hits during the entire match and he had brushed most of them off like they were nothing. So, it seems the rumors of Konoha obtaining another dojutsu are true after all. They all turned to see Han approaching in the steadily darkening grounds. Naruto grinned and ran over to greet his fellow Jinchuriki. Han looked down at the boy, idly curious as to why this child kept approaching him. Yes, Tsunade replied. Naruto is the sole wielder of the Kunshugen. Han hummed. Interesting. Distractions aside, I merely came to inform you that the interrogator your village sent is finished and would like to discuss with us what she has learned. Naruto and Tsunade nodded while Tenten ran off to find her teammates. They followed Han back to their quarters and were shocked to find Anko lying on one of the beds, idly chewing on a stick of dango while the genin from Iwa glared at her. Naruto smiled and leapt onto the bed next to Anko, making her jump in surprise. Kitsu-kun, what are you doing here? Suna-sensei and I got called in to back you up Team 9. What are you doing here? I was in the area on another mission tracking some missing nin when one of my targets ended up trying to infiltrate the meetings here. I offered my services to find out what she knew. We had lots of fun together. Naruto shook his head and chuckled at the sadistic smirk on Anko's face. Moments later, Team 9 arrived and the atmosphere became more serious as Anko shared what she had learned. From what I've gathered, your information was on the nose about that woman not working alone. She's part of a wandering clan. They planned on killing everyone here and blaming it on Han. I'm not sure why yet, as she was just a low-level grunt, but I did manage to find out that they have a forward camp about a half a day north of here. We can't just let them frame Han-sensei like that, Kuretsuchi exclaimed. I'm inclined to agree, Tsunade added. The businessmen here are discussing a merger that would improve relations between the Land of Fire and the Land of Earth. If they are killed, tensions between the two will rise. And with the poor relationship Konoha shares with Iwa, it wouldn't take much to ignite yet another war. How very unyouthful, Guy exclaimed. Guy-sensei, I will protect our clients with my life. Lee shouted. And if I fail I will run back to Konoha on my fingers. As we are still within the borders of the Land of Fire, I will defer leadership to you, Tsunade Senju, Han said calmly. His students did not share his cooperative temperament. You can't be serious, Han-sensei. Osada exclaimed. Yeah, why should we listen to a bunch of tree huggers? Komuro added. How do we know we can trust them? Kuretsuchi asked. You don't have a choice, Anko replied leaning back on the bed. Your mission has not only gone up in rank, but become a collaborative one with shinobi from another village. Seeing as we're still in the Land of Fire, that gives us jurisdiction, and as the highest ranking Konoha shinobi here, Tsunade-sama assumes command since the parameters of the mission have changed. She's right, Han said. Now come, the meetings are about to resume and it is our shift. Tsunade Senju, I will leave the investigative work to your team. Tsunade nodded and sighed as the door closed behind the Iwa shinobi. Tensions had been high between the two genin teams when she and Naruto had arrived. Now she had somehow found herself trying to avert an international incident as well as keep the genin from killing each other. Naruto, as was usually the case for Tsunade, was the only bright spot in this situation. He held no hate for the people of Iowa, and as such, his cheerful personality had him immediately trying to befriend the rock shinobi. She was a little concerned about his newly acquired fixation on his fellow Jinchuriki. Han was well known for holding nothing but distaste for humanity at the best of times. If he found Naruto to be a nuisance, then things could rapidly spiral out of control. On the other hand, She thought, if anybody could get through to him, it would be Naruto. She couldn't help but imagine the political opportunities that could open up if a friendship was formed between two Jinchuriki of different villages. It would be a big first step towards repairing relations with Iwa, and could help promote peace if two bitter enemies could find some way to bury the hatchet. Her attention was drawn back to her student as he pulled on her sleeve to get her attention before signing. She smiled at his question and turned to Guy to relay it. Guy, my student has a request for you. How may I help you, Naruto-kun? Guy asked with a beaming grin. Naruto was wondering if he could speak to you about a taijutsu style he's been working on. As Konoha's taijutsu expert, he was hoping you could provide some input. If possible, Guy's grin grew as he leapt toward Naruto, frightening him with his speed and forcing him to unconsciously flex his muscles in preparation to either run or fight. He landed in front of Naruto, his arm held forward in a thumbs up. I would love to help you in your youthful learning of the great art of taijutsu, Naruto-kun. Come, Lee will be your sparring partner. He and Lee leapt back out the window with a cry of excitement, and Naruto, Tsunade, and Anko followed them out, slightly perturbed at their endless overenthusiasm when it came to training. So, Naruto-kun, how may my student and I be of service? Guy asked. Maybe Naru-kun and Lee could spar for a few rounds while you observe. Tsunade suggested. Naruto and Lee nodded and were trading blows within seconds. Lee was impressed by Naruto's speed and evasiveness, while Naruto was stupefied that there was a genin who was faster and stronger than him. He could tell that Lee was wearing training weights on his legs, and so wasn't quite sure who would come ahead in terms of raw power if they both removed their handicaps, but in a match consisting solely of taijutsu, it was clear that he was outclassed. I'm surprised, Guy said seriously as he stood with Tsunade and Anko watching as Lee's crushing blows hit nothing but air over and over. The way he moves, what style is it? It's one of Naruto's own invention, Tsunade replied. Surely you can't be serious, Tsunade-sama? Guy asked, shocked that a genin would be able to develop their own style of taijutsu when normally it took masters several decades to perfect their own personal style. She is, Anko replied. Naruto's been working on it for a while now. But why? There are hundreds of taijutsu forms in Konoha alone, why develop his own? In a word, Tsunade said, barely restraining the bitterness in her voice. The Sharingan. I don't believe I follow, Tsunade-sama. As I'm sure you're aware, Naruto hasn't had the easiest of childhoods, Tsunade explained. He had to teach himself how to do most things as almost everyone refused to teach him. He has worked harder than everyone except maybe your own student to get where he is, and the manifestation of his dojutsu has only pushed him to work harder. I am glad that he does not allow the arrogance of a bloodline to interfere with his hard work, Guy said. But what does this have to do with the Sharingan? Does he simply wish to prove his eyes are better than the Uchihas? Tsunade shook her head. While the Uchiha clan did treat him worse than most before the massacre and the last surviving heir does not do much to repent for that, that's not why he wants to surpass the Sharingan. Then why? Because to him, it's cheating, Anko replied solemnly. He can't stand the fact that no matter what jutsu he learns, or what style he masters, all the Uchiha has to do is watch him with his Sharingan and he'll learn it, foregoing the hundreds of hours of back-breaking work the rest of us put into mastering our skills. Guy nodded as he watched Naruto spin around another kick from Lee only to take a vicious punch to the ribs. He continued to watch his student struggle to predict his opponent's erratic movements before it dawned on him. He wants to create a style that can't be copied. In a way, Tsunade said. He actually plans on creating 5 styles and combining them into one that will be unique to him. Tsunade-sama, such a task, it would take decades. Tsunade smirked. Considering Naruto's use of shadow clones to maximize his training, it won't quite take that long. But he is determined to do it, regardless of how difficult it is. For the second time that day, Guy was inspired by the perseverance of the boy. His determination and drive to succeed perhaps even surpassed Lee's, proving him to be a true genius of hard work. Explain to me these styles, and I will do my best to help where I can, he said seriously. Tsunade smiled at the way Naruto inspired others without even trying and took a moment to stare fondly at the boy she saw as her son before diving into her explanation. I will explain it to you, but you must keep it a secret just as I'm going to keep the fact that you've taught your student to open the 8 gates. Guy and Anko both looked at her, shock clear on their faces. How did you know? Guy asked. I'm the best medic on the planet, Tsunade bragged as way of explanation. I'm also aware of the fact that Lee can't mold chakra properly, which is the only reason I'm not reporting you to Sarutobi-sensei for doing something as stupid as teaching a genin to open the gates. Thank you for your understanding, Tsunade-sama, Guy said with a bow. If you are willing to keep Lee's abilities to yourself, then I too will carry any details pertaining to your student to the grave. Tsunade nodded, satisfied with his answer. What only a select few know about the Kunshugen is that it gives Naruto the ability to master all 5 forms of nature manipulation. Since learning this, he's been fascinated by the nature of chakra and how it interacts with the world around us. As such, he's taken to using the elements themselves as the basis for the styles he's creating. As you can see, the one he's using right now is based on wind, Anko divulged. He spent days watching the way leaves fell to the ground and moved in the breeze. That's astounding, Guy said, watching as Naruto cartwheeled over one of Lee's kicks, planting his feet on the other boy's shoulder blades and kicking off into a backflip. The force of his jump forced Lee, who was still off balance from his kick, to tumble to the ground. So, he focuses on evasion to force his opponent off balance, using a series of circular movements to preserve momentum. That's correct, Tsunade replied. This style doesn't have much raw power, as he will undoubtedly develop another for that, but it's quite useful when combined with his kenjutsu, ninjutsu, and fuinjutsu. They continued to watch for several minutes until the sparring match came to an abrupt halt. Naruto had been evading an axe kick from Lee, but had inadvertently left himself open. Lee took the opportunity and punched Naruto in the shoulder. Hard. Naruto was sent skidding across the ground, but was relatively unharmed while Lee had dropped to his knees, clutching his broken hand with a cry of pain. Tsunade immediately stepped in, examining Lee's hand before performing a quick healing jutsu. Naruto simply watched, stupefied, as his friend clenched his teeth in pain. He hadn't meant to let Lee hit his prosthetic arm. But because he wasn't careful, he had inadvertently injured him. He didn't realize that his breathing had quickened as he watched his sensei working on the injury. Kit, it's okay, you didn't do anything. His father's voice rang through his head, but he just couldn't shake the panic that was slowly clutching at his heart. What if Lee hated him for injuring him? What if Tsunade and Anko started to resent him for going too far? These thoughts swirled around his mind, slowly spiraling into memories of being chased away amidst cries for his death. He hadn't even realized he had moved until warm arms encircled him, holding him close. The smell of lilac entered his nose and he felt his face being held against something soft. Hubby Hannah, he croaked, confused as to why she would be hugging him on the roof of the opposite side of the mansion. It's okay, Naruto-kun, Anko said soothingly. They don't think you did it on purpose and they don't hate you. How can you be so sure? Because, I feel the same way whenever I train with Kur-chan and she winds up getting injured. It was a training accident, they happen. Tsunade-sama will have his hand good as new by tomorrow. You're sure? Naruto's eyes were pleading for the hope she gave him not to be misplaced. He smiled when all he saw in her warm chocolate gaze was warmth, comfort, and understanding. They continued to look into each other's eyes as their faces slowly drew together. They were less than an inch apart when a dull thud caught their attention and forced them apart. They both looked out over the front courtyard and Naruto spotted two figures darting between the bushes towards the front door. Anko prepared to jump down when Naruto grabbed her arm.